Welcome, everybody, and thanks so much for joining. There might still be some people coming in a bit late, and Liesl will handle that as they drift in. We did have over 40 registrations, but it's a bit of a lucky draw in terms of how many people actually show up on the day. Today we're talking about transforming strategic vision into action, and it's a kind of a part two of what we covered last month. So for those of you who were here last month, we focused very much on the creation and interpretation of strategic vision. And we were asking the question, why is it so difficult? Why is it so difficult to come up with the vision? And why is it so difficult for people to recall the vision or align with the vision? And we had a clinical psychologist with us really just talking about the intro and inter-psychological aspects of the vision thing. Today, we're going right over to the organizational end and trying to understand, vision and execution of vision in organizations. Very much drawing today from Henry Mintzberg. So for those of you who like a good read, Henry Mintzberg's been studying organizations for about 40 years. And last year, he published an update, really, which he called Understanding Organizations Finally, 2023. And I can't recommend it enough. So if you enjoy organizational theory, please go and have a look. So again, for those of you who might not have been on our calls for a while or are not used to our calls, we structure these conversations, and we call them conversations for a reason, because we want you to talk to each other and to us. It's not just a lecture. And I know that makes some people uncomfortable, but if you are uncomfortable, I invite you to try it out. The conversation pieces are really in two parts. We go into a conversation right now. It's a very short one, and you'll be in small groups. And it's really a chance for you to get to know some other people and to have a small chat to bring your mind into the space. And we'll give you some questions for that. It lasts about 9 minutes. Then we give you some content. So there is a bit of a monologue, and today is fairly content heavy, with apologies, but I'm going to enjoy delivering it. And then you go back into a conversation to talk to your colleagues and the others on the call to see how you make sense of what it is that I've said. And then we have an open conversation. I can promise you that if you submit yourself to the full conversational format, you'll get a lot out of it. But each time we do this, we see some people run away in fear because now they're suddenly in a conversation group. I invite you not to run away in fear. Stick around and enjoy the conversation. The questions I'd like you to take into your conversation groups for 9 minutes today is, what is your organization's vision or direction statement? And please don't be embarrassed or feel awkward if you can't remember it or can't remember what it was, just share that. And for those of you that can remember what it is, share that. How long has it been there, and does it move the organization, or what we'll give you to talk about in your breakout groups. And we're going to call you back in about 9 minutes, after which I'll share some theory with you. So please enjoy your breakouts. Liesl, you can open them, and we'll see you back here in 9 minutes. That was tremendous. I was very lucky. So I got to be in a room with blood services, mining and related engineering, and Gauteng and Gauteng control and administration. So an interest of visions and operating cores. So let's crack on. I hope you did get to meet some nice people, and I see that most of you did manage to stick around for the what some people find difficult. For sharing. So a bit of theory then, and where we're heading with this is to start with, organizations we know are not one thing. And as I said before, we're drawing from Mintzberg, who broadly says there are four primary forms of organization, and you'll see why this is important as we go along. While I'm talking about it, I'd very much like you to ask yourself, which form of organization are you in? So, is yours a personal enterprise or a program machine or a project pioneer or a professional assembly? I'll try and paint us a little picture for each one. The personal enterprise is a relatively easy one to understand. It has one big chief, and it's usually the founder, but not always, and it's led quite autocratically. So if you go back to the birth of Virgin Records, for those of you who can remember when Richard Branson, before he owned airlines, he started a record company, and very much that record label or music label was around Branson. The original Pick and Pay, around Raymond Ackerman, very much personal enterprise. The PSG Group, which has grown to now include their big investments in Capitec and in the schools business, was around the Mouton family at the start. So most small and medium-sized businesses, certainly by number of companies, these personal enterprises are going to be dominant. There are more of these than there are others. But it's also at a time of turnaround. And that's interesting because, you could take any one of the others, and if they're failing, you revert to the personal enterprise, centralized authority around a turnaround leader or agent, and any of the other forms will feel like a personal enterprise at turnaround. The second one we all recognize quite easily is the program machine. This is usually a large-scale organization that runs around rules and processes, looking for scale and volume, where work is largely standardized, even if it doesn't feel that way inside the organization. It is largely standardized, and there's a bureaucracy. So we think about banks, we think about insurance companies, some government departments, not all, factories, large-scale manufacturing plants. They should, by and large, run either for safety reasons or for efficiency reasons as program machines. The project pioneers are those loose, fast, team-based organizations. My daughter's boyfriend works for a startup called BioMine Health, where they are using AI to examine the human biome. And they're very much the project pioneer. Small group, agile. They're interested in solving problems through projects. They do a lot of experiments. They do a lot of collaboration inside and outside the team. And they are an adhocracy where leadership is shared. So whoever is the leader in the, is the expert in the moment will lead the conversation at any point in time. Typically software companies, craft businesses, platform companies. And then the professional assembly. So this is where it is an organization built around a profession. They solve expert problems and they don't solve other problems. They have standardization of skills. So everybody inside that organization, for example, the South African Blood Services would be standardized around nursing skills at its operating core. And they're a meritocracy. When they work well, the best professionals will be promoted and come up the ranks. This is what hospitals, of course, should look like. So the hospital is built around the medical profession. So in a hospital, you've got gynecology, pediatrics, urology, gynecology, whatever it might be. And those are the professional assemblies that make up the hospital. Other local government departments, so if you are trying to submit your building plans to the local council, it'll go through water, sanitation, building, transport, whatever it might be, those professional departments. Architecture and legal firms are obvious examples. Accounting firms are obvious examples. So those are the 4 forms. And I wanted you to just pause and say, which one is yours? What kind of organization is yours, do you think? You can refine that as we go along. And you are welcome to say that you're more than one. You might, in your mind, already start to say, well, one department is this and one department is that. If you do that, I want you to ask yourself, which is the operating core? So, you know, if you work for a heavy machinery manufacturing business, the operating core will be the people who make that machine. And then you've got support services around that. So to try and identify your operational core and then the support services around them, start with your operating core, say what are they, and then move out from there. So let's go a little bit deeper. And start to link this conversation to vision and strategy, which is the point of today's call. Because what I realized is you can't answer the question, what should a vision look like, for any organization? Because it turns out there's not one generally useful rule. So the first thing I want to do is explain a couple of terms, and you can see these colors in the center of the screen. Firstly, the term emergent. That means that whatever it is adapting, changing over time. It's not fixed and solid. So if you look at emergent versus deliberate, deliberate would be something that we can lock in. I heard that very nicely from Zama at the South African National Blood Service, where there's a very deliberate perspective that's been there for 21 years. They collect safe blood for patients. And it's been that way for a very long time. It's very deliberate. And it's a kind of a perspective. It's not a fixed market position. They're not saying they collect 1 million liters of blood or whatever it might be. It's this perspective. And that's the second idea. What is the difference between a perspective and a position? And a perspective is fairly broad and maybe in some way moves you. The position is quite specific, and depending on who you are, you might or might not get moved by it. So let's look at these combinations of these 3 ideas. For the personal enterprise, where you've got this one big chief ruling it, the vision and the strategy are what the founder wants. And because the founder is a human being, there might be a perspective. This founder might be a humanist, this founder might be an engineer, this founder might be any range of kinds of people with kinds of skills, and they'll have a perspective. But the positions that they're trying to take in the market will be emergent, because typically these personal enterprises keep trying things. Open new things, close them down, try a new thing, try and build the market, try and get bigger. So execution of strategy is pretty much as the founder says. It revolves around direct supervision. It is centralized to the chief, and the force inside that firm is consolidation. Everything, what doesn't matter what you do, it consolidates back to that founder. And some of you on the call may be in such a firm. In the professional assembly, the vision and the strategy are primarily dictated by what the professional standards are. So doctors respond to the medical profession. Lawyers respond to the legal profession in their disciplines. Engineers respond to what the electrical engineering or mechanical engineering professions are. So there's a professional perspective to that professional assembly when it's running well. And in local government, the profession of town planning, the profession of transport engineering, the profession of water and sanitation are central to a well-running unit. But their positions are emergent, depending on the context. So, you know, a well-running a local council in, say, the Western Cape in Cape Town is not the same as a well-running council in a small rural village, because the context is different and the positions that they set or the targets that they might be setting are different. Executing strategy in the professional assembly is about training, standardization of skills, decentralization to the professionals. The professionals have to hold each of their professions, and the driving force is proficiency, to be very good at your profession. Then we get the program machine, and the program machine is primarily driven by what the industry dictates. The visions in the program machine are quite marginal moves. You're not, even if you do see something bold in a vision statement, it usually, in hindsight, doesn't emerge as bold. It might be take a bit more of a market share. So usually very deliberate positions in the program machine. It is to sell X more or to win X more customers, not so much motivational unless you are somebody who's driven by those quant numbers. Here, it's about standardization of work, decentralized to analysts. Analysts play a heavy role in the program machine. How are we doing against target? We need MIS, we need dashboards, and that program machine survives on efficiency. If they're not efficient, there's too much waste, and they can put large amounts of capital at risk. And finally, the project pioneer. Here, the driving force is a unique project purpose. Each project could have a different vision or a different goal. So you've got emergent and multiple perspectives if you're in a multi-project firm. Each of those projects could have their own perspective and position. Here, execution is very much about what we think of as collaboration, mutual adjustment, agile, responsive, learning, decentralized to teams. And what we are seeing at the moment is that the project pioneer is the current flavor. Everybody wants to be the project pioneer. So enterprises trying to set up these teams, professional assemblies trying to set up these teams, program machines trying to set up these teams, with collaboration at the center. That word is key. But what actually then moves the organization? So in the personal enterprise, we'll see at the bottom, it's quite emotional, and it's moved by consolidation. The vision is the expression of the chief's personality. All diagnosis of what should we do pretty much runs through the chief if they're the big decisions, and usually relatively low science, a little bit of art, seeing, and a bit of craft, doing, but not a lot in a lot of these firms. So you'll see why that's important in a second. The organization moves around the chief. In the professional assembly, professional standards will shift the firm. So if there's a move in the professional standards, where the accounting industry went from GAP to, I forget what it was, IFRS, that's right, that will shift an accounting firm. There are multiple visions because each of the professional units will have their own vision. Gynecologists are doing one thing in the hospital and pediatrics are doing another. And they don't necessarily align. The professional does diagnosis in this firm, and there's a lot of craft plus science, professional analysis, professional doing. This is driven by the professional, and it is about proficiency. In the program machine, the vision would be a desired position in a defined market. So that's the more classic definition of the vision. There's very little diagnosis in the professional machine. You take what's on offer. You know, if you go to a bank and you say to them that you would, very much like to have your personal banker please arrange for you to have a massage while you visit the bank. It's not going to happen. They can lend you money, or you can deposit money, or you can, in one form or another, that's pretty much what they do. Take your money and guard it for you, and or lend you some. High science, lots of analysis in the program machine to make sure that their processes are efficient. It's very analytical and it's very much about efficiency. Project Pioneer is moved by vision per project. So they're driven by visions in the project. The team does diagnosis, very much about craft and art with some science, you know, as they learn. And I'm seeing this even in this startup that my daughter's boyfriend's involved in. They're doing that lean startup route. So learn, adjust, pivot or persist kind of conversation. Very experimental, very collaborative. Hopefully you're now starting to get clearer pictures of which form you are in your organization. Because these are nice thinking tools, but no organization is any one of these, obviously. They're all flavors or combinations. So the three words I want to just introduce you to now are contagion, hybrids, and transitions. Starting with contagion, if you look at the operating core of the organization, so we'll take one that I don't know anything about, so I'm just making this up, please, and the people from the South African National Blood Service can correct me when you in your breakout rooms and in the plenary. If in the operating core, it's nurses who are engaging with the public in one way or another to draw blood, we would expect that the qualities of those nurses, the nursing profession, some caring, but also very strict adherence to process because it's got to be safe blood and no harm to the donor or to the recipient. Those qualities of nursing will infect the others. So even if the accounting department is one form and the operating core is another, the qualities of the operating core are likely to infect the rest. So even in a personal enterprise, even if the accounting department is trying to follow accounting standards, often the CEO or chief is trying to make them do things that maybe aren't part of the profession. Hybrids are where you've got different forms, you know, side by side. So there could be the accounts section is one and production and manufacturing is another. Or if you're highly divisionalized, which is a unique form on its own, each of the divisions might have its own operating core, but all under one company. So that company looks like a hybrid. And then, of course, the third thing is transitions. You could be in a period of change. Personal enterprises, at some point, and we used the example of Pick and Pay earlier, at some point they go from the personal enterprise under Raymond Ackerman into professional management. And often with professional management, it can start to feel like a program machine. And you need professionals running it. And instead of the owner somewhat intuitively driving the firm, the professional managers start to take over. And how do you transition from one to the other is challenging. It's not an easy transition. Programmed machines under pressure might try to form the project pioneers, or at least figure out a way. Project pioneers, as they scale up, find a very successful formula for one project and they try and transition that into the program machine. So you get this idea of contagion, hybrids, and transitions. Over at the bottom in the yellow, you can see the personal enterprise. Well, anything that happens inside the enterprise can always be overpowered by the chief. Inside the professional assembly, even if you're a hybrid, you can always be overpowered by the professional. So the architect will tell the people that are in the support services of the architectural firm how they want things to be. Inside the program machine, it doesn't matter what you try, you will usually be overpowered by standards and analysis. And inside the project pioneer, you'd usually be overpowered by complexity. So every time you try and standardize your, say, your accounts department, a new project comes up that has completely different requirements to the last one. So often you've got the functions embedded in the project teams, and they try and cope as best they can. So that's the story about multiple forms. You may well work inside a group or a team, inside an organization, and you might even feel, given the people on this call, that your department, if you're an OD, change, and one of the support, that the form of your team or group doesn't really match the rest of the organization. That's appropriate. Just be able to identify which one is the operating core, and then you will feel the effect of the operating core on your unit. The interesting thing is that for many people, they've never really seen this. So you could be inside, you could have worked for 10, 15, 20 years, if you're lucky enough, inside a particular form. And that's how you think the world works. And so when we talk about things like vision, you think it's the way vision should be in this form of organization. And you try and apply that to another form, and it's not the same, because the other forms may have very emergent visions as they're trying things. They're not fixed long-term visions. That whole idea of the fixed long-term vision was pretty much written for the program machine. So effectiveness and engagement. What do you do? How do you develop inside each of these? And the caution, of course, is what works in one doesn't work necessarily in the other. For those of you who follow our online blogs, yesterday we published one called Not All Roads Lead to Collaboration. This collaboration is certainly a flavor of the month, and everybody's working on increasing collaboration. But as we said, collaboration is not always the solution. In the personal enterprise, what drives it is leadership by the senior executive. And when we say leadership, we mean in all of its best qualities. So if you are lucky enough to have a CEO or an MD in a personal enterprise who demonstrates great leadership qualities along with contingent rewards. And I know that in the leadership theory, contingent rewards is just sort of halfway up. And by contingent rewards, we mean, if you do this, I'll pay you that. And if you don't do this, I'll fire you. Kind of very overly simplified. But that is what will drive that organization. It is the chief's standards that will set the performance metrics. You're trying to standardize a performance management system inside a personal enterprise is a fool's errand, because the CEO usually doesn't necessarily want to participate in it, and therefore everything that should drive the system is absent from it. So this is a negative, or this system will struggle if the chief's character or capabilities are weak, and at their best, it feels like a family. It is an autocracy, and it should be driven by tasks and goals when it works well. In the professional assembly, the professional identity must drive. So those engineers need to be celebrated, and you see that the driving force at the bottom of that middle block is pride. To take pride in their profession. To be the best doctor, the best nurse, the best engineer, the best analyst, if it's an analytical firm. Professional standards are what moves it. It's negative if the professional skills are low, or if the supporting technostructure becomes too powerful. So if somehow the support services become what that organization is about instead of the operating core, then the professional assembly fails, obviously, because if I went there because I have a water problem and the technostructure is dominant and there are no professionals, then I don't think my water problem is going to get fixed. But a lot of forms might get filled out. We saw an article in, I think it's in Daily Maverick this morning about, I think there was only one person, one qualified person to review parole applications from the prison system in South Africa, one professional, to try and review all parole applications. So that is obviously a profession, and there's too few. This is a meritocracy, and you shift it with professional recruitment and enablement. You really drive that professional operating core, and then the support services must respond to the profession. Program machine. In the program machine, those big banks, those large corporations, they're driven by certainty, a sense of at least a belief in control, security, and contingent reward. So people who show up inside those program machines are going to feel more secure in their jobs than people who are working for small businesses, for example, or project pioneers. They're going to feel as if they finally landed the secure job, but they're going to not necessarily love their job because it's driven by analytical standards. Program machines fail when and if the standards are not maintained. So if for some reason the quality of your banking service fails, you will change banks. And if the quality of that banking service fails too dramatically and too quickly, that'd be a terrible risk, you know. And if processes vary too often, so every time you see one of these big program machines trying to vary their processes, all sorts of problems kick in. Suddenly their creditors are being paid late. Interest calculations might not be correct on a client account. So process changes are quite dangerous in the program machine. And they're about money. They're about making money, and they're about paying money. You know, they are a bureaucracy, and they're pretty much, you know, where your change work is around KPIs, and good, rock solid management. And when I say management, I don't exclude leadership. I'm using management in the traditional sense where it had plan, organize, control, and lead. So, but these are management heavy firms where planning and organizing and controlling are important. And then the project pioneer. The work drives the project pioneer, the creation, the product. It has purposeful standards. It's negative if processes standardize. So if you try and force analysis or force standards on the project pioneer, it semi-implodes because it actually can't function in too rigid an environment. You often see this if there's been an acquisition. So a big company buys a small startup, exciting firm, and the next day the analysts arrive and they're all trying to get efficiencies into the project pioneer. And the project pioneer is not driven by efficiency. It's driven by craftsmanship. So there is a lot of inefficiency in a project pioneer. And there should be. It's an adhocracy, or as otherwise called a teamocracy. So the team, you know, works in all of the classic ways we think about teams. It's in the project pioneer that they are most alive. And probably best driven by a very open-ended system like OKRs, objectives and key results, in terms of performance and execution. How do you improve things then? And this is the last of my slides. So, and then we're going to send you off to have a discussion about this. So hang in there for a couple more minutes. To improve vision and execution in the personal enterprise, develop a healthy, effective chief first. If you can get the mental and physical health as well as the skills of that chief in the personal enterprise higher and higher and higher and higher, the personal enterprise will benefit from that. So first, the chief. And I say this because in many cases, we're called in to do the work by the chief on the team. The team is the problem. And we know, we've been doing this work long enough, that in the personal enterprise, at the very least, the work should be in parallel, chief and team, or chief first, then team. In the professional assembly, you build the profession with the support services around it. So the skills, humanity, and leadership of the core professionals does drive change. So if you can find a way to work with the doctors, the nurses, the engineers, as gentle as you might need to be, that over time is going to compound into a different form of organization. I know that one of the people on the call, Multitech, the founder and then the founder's son have played quite a pivotal role. And despite being engineers, they developed over time quite a deep understanding of people and of organizations and of change. So highly empathetic engineers, if you like. Program machine, you've got to work with managers. So healthy, effective managers make a very big difference. Management, in brackets, with that leadership component, then develop the in-silo, in-unit processes and skills and the linkages between the silos. I think that one's very well documented, and we're all familiar with that space. In the Project Pioneer, you invest heavily in core tradecraft skills and team effectiveness. So relationship and core tradecraft. That hopefully gives you a sense that if you're investing in a developmental effort that looks like it belongs in a different space, you may have an explanation for why so many of our intervention efforts everybody loves them, they enjoy them, they're great fun to go through, but they don't really change anything because they can't. The forces inside the core form are what they are, and unless you work with those forces, trying to inject something from the outside is very difficult. So the question I've got for you is, what form of organization, and I'll say this while Liesl gets us ready to put us into breakout groups, which form do you belong to? You already in the opening talked about the vision. Which of these forms do you belong to? And does your direction statement match the form? Does it now make sense? We'd like to do this for about 12 minutes to have a little bit of a discussion and see where that goes. And then we'll pull you back for plenary discussions. Thanks, Liesl. You can open the groups. Welcome back, everybody.
We've got rudely pulled back after solving the world's issues. We were on the brink.
That Zoom whiplash, when you suddenly find yourself, it's like being tackled by Ches and Colby. Welcome back, everybody. So I don't know who was in what group, but I'd like to, just open it up a little. I was spending most of my time with Becca. We've had the usual 10 o'clock drop-off, so people who signed up for a 90-minute session but only had 1 hour available have left us. So we'll regard you guys as the core experts now. Group one, Liesl, who was that?
Should we start with room one? It's Levine, Mbali, and Todi.
Okay.
What came up for you guys?
Okay. For me, I'll start with me. I'm giving feedback, and I'm hoping that I will represent my colleagues properly. From me, I'm from SANBS, and I believe from the discussion we had, that we are between professional and programmed machine. And the reasons for that was that our company is, as much as it is a non-profit company, it is actually run, if you look at the value chain from the collection of blood to the blood transfusion, it's kind of run like a assembly line, and it's very, very done much, it's driven by processes, policies, procedures, and you have to stick to those. That is the side of the programmed machine. However, it is run by professionals. If you look at it, mostly we have the medical profession. We've got doctors and researchers. We've got nurses, as you mentioned earlier, and even in the supporting. This is now the core. The core part of the organization that has got medical professions, but even the supporting departments, finance will have the professionals, you know, the IT will have professionals, HR will have professionals. So it's very much driven in that kind of way. And it is, our vision is still linked and it's still relevant to the format of the organization. Okay, and then with Mbali, a consulting firm, it's more of a, I think she said professional, because you know it's professionals that are running consulting firm. You have to get specialized skills for them to be able to solve problems for their clients. So they've got professionals, but it also more like a project pioneering type, because you get multiple or different solutions that you have to have for different problems or needs. Client needs. So you find one client needs something that is change management related, another one needs something that is leadership development related, another one needs something that is OD related. So as much it's driven by professionals, but the projects, you know, the way you deal with the projects and you combine, it makes it to be more like project pioneer. So it's between the two. And then with Levine, it was more it's more like it started like the history that they were given is that it started by a partnership, like, you know, driven by one person. Then it grew. It's a business that's been there for about 30 years. So it grew, and it grew where it was more going to the professional and then going towards being a programmed machine. It's a what Levine, you have to help me here, but I think it's a transport business, transport kind of business, like delivering parcels and, you know, transport people. So they also do a lot of projects where they assist the unemployed people. They've got a program, where they do projects to develop and upskill and then create jobs for. So from her perspective, it's like it's got a little bit of everything, their organization. And now that they're
what I take out of that, sorry to come, is you've put your finger on a couple of nice issues there, which is a professional assembly is lots of professions.
Yes.
When you've only got one central profession, let's say it's around blood, so it's the let's call it the profession of
medical.
Then it starts to look like a program machine, because the professionals set the standards and the standards run through the unit, and it looks, when there's only one kind of professional at the top, it looks like a program machine. The other thing you put your finger on is the difficulty of identifying the operating core. Because even in the South African National Blood Service, is the operating core the extraction of the blood from the patient? Or is the operating core the storage, transport, and provision, so the logistics? And you know, which one is actually at the core there becomes a challenge. I want to just pause there to give a little bit of chance for the other groups to debrief, and then we'll come back to you if we can.
Thank you.
Who was in group 2?
Group 2, Craig, was you, and some of your colleagues have left, but Becca is still here.
Becca. So Becca, would you mind giving us a short description of what we heard from Zama that probably supports what Tori said, and then your perspective?
Yeah, I guess Zama is from where Tori's from, and I think she shared the same. She didn't have the sort of aspect of professionalism. She was more firm on a programmed machine. From my case, the firm is 50 years old. It certainly started as a personal enterprise, and for most of that 50 years was like that. 5-7 years ago, we started a process which I don't think we conceptualized off the back of this, but it's certainly a process of going towards more a professional enterprise. And much as I say, the vision is not written down. I mean, I think we're quite clear about where we're going and what we're trying to achieve.
Although it is typical in the personal enterprise that the vision, even if it is written down, it gets rewritten every year or two because the founder has a new vision each time. Who was in group 3?
Group 3 is Richard,
I think
Saul,
Cecil-
Skalk,
Cecil-
and Sabaki.
Oh,
Cecil was nominated, I suspect.
But Cecil can go then. It's room
no,
4
sorry.
first, then we'll do room 3 next. You go, Cecil.
Sorry, I jumped in quickly there. So JP, Adebayo, and I were in the room, and all three of us in professional services of some sorts. Adebayo and I in sort of OD consulting space, and JP in IT services. Certainly IT, JP, everything that he said sounded like Project Pioneer. The language he was using was, it's like herding cats. We're special forces, not farmers. We adopt agile. And so everything was around that form, organizational form. And they're quite large as well. And very project driven with vision belonging to projects rather than to the organization as a whole. For Adebayo and I, it was a little bit different, a little bit more personal enterprise. For me in particular, I mean, our company's name is the last names of myself and my partner. So our company name is Tsalana Marriage. Oh, hang on, how did that happen? Yes, very much personal enterprise. We are the brand and we're front up there. The question around, does your direction statement match the form, was left to about the last 30 seconds of our conversation. And it seemed to us that it almost inevitably, there is some alignment because of the kind of language we inevitably use, even though it's not deliberately structured to match. We spontaneously use language in our direction statement that aligns with our form.
Thanks, Cecil. Thank you so much. And I'm delighted that JP is on the call because having as pure a project organization on these sorts of calls is highly unusual. Because if you're inside the project organizations, you're usually not looking for a better way to organize. You're often just busy coping with organizing. You know, you're solving those problems. So JP, you're definitely a mature form of the project firm by showing up. Is there any groups that are left, Liesl?
Yeah, room 3 had Sabaki, Skalk, Richard, and Saul.
Who's representing that room?
Right, I would go. Yes, we battled quite a lot. I think it's the conflict between the organizational vision and sometimes the divisional vision. So I'll also mention that it's the task of HR to ensure that the organizational vision is being incorporated into the various departments. We had a discussion around that. What makes it furthermore complex is if your core business is far less amount of staff than the rest of the other visions. So you're actually only catering for a small portion of your organization into the core, and the rest are being technically left out because they operate in a different, they could be operating in a different form. So that is a difficult one to drive through. Also, Sabaki and Richard stressed the ability to be, specifically our group was also a lot of consultants, is the flexibility. As a consultant, you walk in, you need to identify the form very quickly. You need to identify the perhaps an overlap of forms, and you need to be flexible in providing that support. Just lastly, we've also identified possible risk with enterprise. Personal enterprise is a sustainability if the members should not exist and a family continue, or wherever how it continue. And it was mentioned with one of our members is that it could pose quite a risk towards sustainability. I think that's in a nutshell. They can always chip in if there's something left.
Scott, thank you. I think, again, having the higher education institution voice here is tremendous. We've been lucky enough to work with quite a few over the last few months, and typically the university is a professional assembly, because obviously what you think of as the schools and faculties and departments, each of those are the professions in the university. So, and typically, much like a hospital with the medical professionals side by side, in the university, the various professional heads, the academic core, don't really work much with each other. So, the medical faculty doesn't talk to the business faculty much in the ordinary course of things. And within the business faculty, unfortunately, the strategy guy and the finance guy often don't talk to each other. They just run their classes. So you're right in the sense of that operating core in the professional assembly, and it's smaller than the support services. We have an interesting situation, particularly in South Africa. I don't know how normal it is elsewhere, where many of our universities, the academic core has got smaller and the technostructure and support services have got larger. And
yes,
and now there's an effort actually underway in many universities under the heading of transformation and change to right-size the support services for the academic core. But if you don't pay attention, if you forget that you are a professional assembly, you see local government and universities and healthcare where the operating core gets smaller, the professional core, and the support services get larger. And that's a trend, I think, that is not healthy for a professional assembly. You also talked about the need to understand the form and the state. Is it in transition? Like Becca talked beautifully about the transition from the personal enterprise to what it often becomes, the program machine. Around professionals. So first the professional divisionization, and then within those, they look for some standards to try and drive. But those transitions aren't easy. I know that in Becca's case, they've got quite lucky to have a very emotionally mature second generation CEO, but it's not always that case. The first generation founders of organizations that run them as personal enterprises really struggle to create the conditions for transition, which Becca talked about. The father found it difficult. The son is finding it easier. And so form and state and transition. We've got to tie this together. We've got 4 minutes left. What does it mean for strategy and execution? The vision thing that we've been talking about for the last, feels to me like the last 6 months, but that's been me building up to this conversation. I think as practitioners, we're trained to say that the organization leadership is supposed to be about a vision. There's just no definition of leadership that doesn't include, helping people achieve some future state. So leadership, everything we know about leadership is anchored around some sort of vision. And we read a lot that organizations are supposed to have some sort of inspiring vision. Well, it turns out that those things are mostly written for the program machine. The second thing we read a lot about is teams and team dynamics. Well, all of the team and team dynamic theory that is so lovely, including Lencioni and others, obviously has a perfect fit in the Project Pioneer. In that space, teaming and team dynamics really pay dividends. But not so much in the personal enterprise in its pure form, when the founder is still the autocrat and is still running everything. teaming and team values and principles actually could create disillusionment. You keep running programs to tell people how to collaborate, but every time they try and collaborate, the CEO steps in. I remember that happening at Bateman Enterprises 30 years ago. An internal team developed a solution to a problem. And when the CEO found out that this internal team was meeting on Wednesdays, he hired and delegated a person to run that team. And the next week, the team didn't meet anymore because they were meeting voluntarily to solve a problem. And the CEO tried to take control of it. So form and state matter, and they drive what is appropriate vision, what is appropriate direction. Should we have kind of fixed positions, or should we have emergent perspectives? And where do we put our developmental effort if we want the transition to happen is unique. Closing statements from, I think, Becca, I'd like to invite you to say a couple of words, if you don't mind, on what you think we might take out of this, and then one more after Becca.
So I think what I took out of this is the consciousness about structure of organizations. It, as I said, we in a little bit of change at the moment. It helps me to see a little bit clearer where we're moving from and where we're moving towards. And maybe just talking metrics, focusing on structure of the organization first before the metrics that will match that organization.
Thanks, Becca. Anybody else want to put a closing comment or statement, or any other comment or statement before we have to wrap? For those of you who want to stay on the call after 10:30, we will, but I'd like to hear a few more voices if we can. Somebody's hand went up on my screen. Cecil.
For me, definitely a learning around hammer and nail. For me, as a provider of certain professional services, I have a hammer. And suddenly, recognizing different org forms said, oh, okay, it's not always about my hammer, but using appropriate tools for appropriate forms, but appropriate contexts. And being conscious of that and being intentional about how we do approach our clients and serve them based on who they are.
Thanks, Cecil. I agree with you, by the way. And I think some of the biggest mistakes I've made in the last few years is hitting the wrong nail. All right, guys. It's 10:30. So those of you who have stayed to 10:30, for that I'm immensely grateful. Thank you. We'll try and do our best in future to remind delegates that it is 90 minutes so that you get the full benefit of working with 3 or 4 or 5 people in your breakout rooms. This was also a little bit more content heavy than our usual discussion, so I took a little bit longer with the theory, but I hope that wasn't in vain. We'll announce our next one in the next 48 hours, so please keep an eye out on LinkedIn and join us next month for a conversation around teams and how the teams part of this fits into the story.